Flight 812 climbed steadily through the clouds, the hum of the twin engines a constant, soothing presence, or at least it should have been. For most passengers, the flight from Dallas to Chicago was just another Tuesday. But for Maya Carter, 29, seasoned flight attendant, today carried a tension she couldn't place. She moved down the aisle with the practiced grace of a dancer, checking seat belts, offering a reassuring smile here, a gentle nod there. Her uniform was crisp, her hair pulled into a perfect bun, but her sharp hazel eyes missed nothing. She noticed the subtle signs first. The man in seat 14 be gripping his phone so tightly his knuckles whitened. The mother in 22C whispering reassurances to her sleeping child with tremors in her voice. The elderly couple in 9D and 9E exchanging worried glances. Something in the air felt electric. Maya shook the thought away. Flight attendants were trained to notice tension, to remain calm no matter the circumstances. But sometimes, instinct screamed louder than training. She approached the beverage cart, moving fluidly between rows of anxious passengers. "Coffee? Water?" she asked, her voice bright, masking the worry twisting in her stomach. Most passengers barely looked at her. Their eyes were fixed on the ceiling panels as if they could sense the turbulence that hadn't yet arrived, or worse, some invisible threat. Maya's gut tightened. And then it happened. A sudden vibration ran through the fuselage, barely perceptible at first but enough to make the metal cabin walls hum. The passengers tensed, and a soft murmur ran through the cabin like a ripple across water. The captain's voice cut sharply over the intercom, calm but clipped. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are experiencing a minor technical issue. Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." Minor technical issue. The words should have been reassuring, but they were anything but. Maya felt a cold drop of sweat trace her spine. She knew the captain's tone. He was masking fear. Maya moved back toward the front of the plane, her pace purposeful but controlled. She glanced at the overhead bins, ensuring everything was secure. She checked the emergency exits with a practiced sweep, her mind racing through protocols she had memorized years ago. The airline drilled her relentlessly, but nothing had prepared her for the feeling that came next, the unmistakable sense that something was coming. Something more than turbulence, more than a mechanical fault. Outside the window, clouds swirled in shades of gray and white, shadows of sunlight struggling through the storm. And then she saw it, the silhouette of a jet, sleek and angular, cutting through the clouds with terrifying precision. Maya froze for just a fraction of a second, her breath catching. There were two more flanking it, invisible to most eyes but unmistakable to hers. F-35s. She blinked. A chill ran down her spine. Why were these aircraft escorting a commercial airliner? More importantly, why did one of the pilots look directly at her? Something passed in the gaze that was impossible to describe, recognition, and an almost imperceptible spark of respect. Maya's mind raced. Her past life, the secret missions she had carried out for the government under the call sign Falcon, suddenly felt as though it had caught up to her. The intercom crackled again, this time with the co-pilot's voice unsteady. Cabin pressure dropping, oxygen masks deploying now. The soft whir of the overhead compartment's opening was immediately followed by the descent of oxygen masks, clinking against the ceiling. Panic rippled through the cabin like wildfire. A child in row 12 began crying, and a man in 14B dropped his phone, his hands shaking. Maya's voice, calm and commanding, cut through the panic. "Masks on. Breathe slowly. You are safe with me. Just trust me." She moved down the aisle with precision, helping passengers pull the masks over their faces. Her hands moved swiftly, checking that each one was secure, adjusting straps, offering a quiet reassurance that carried the weight of her confidence. A mother in 22C clutched her baby, trembling. Maya lifted the child, holding it gently but firmly against her chest, rocking it back and forth. "You're safe," she whispered. The baby stopped crying immediately, as if sensing the authority radiating from her. Meanwhile, the aircraft shuddered as the F-35s outside adjusted formation, slicing through the clouds like predators. Maya could hear the faint radio chatter between the jets, snippets of code that were almost indecipherable, but one word echoed in her mind: Falcon. her call sign. A ghost from missions long buried in secrecy, now alive in the heads-up displays of pilots she had never met. Recognition flared, shock and awe laced through the voice of one pilot. She had never imagined that, in the midst of a civilian emergency, her legend would be acknowledged. Inside, the co-pilot was pale, his grip on the controls white-knuckled. The captain's voice quivered slightly as he addressed the first officer. I can't. Pressure's dropping too fast. Brace for emergency descent." Maya's heart pounded, but her mind was a razor-sharp instrument. She scanned the cabin, noting the panic, the fear, the helplessness. 174 lives were in her hands, and every second counted. She moved toward the cockpit, fingers clenched on her harness. Her training as a flight attendant had prepared her for emergencies, for turbulence, for fires. But this was different. This was a test of every skill she had honed in secret missions years ago, now coming to bear on innocent civilians. She passed the man in 14B again. He was frozen, staring at her with wide eyes. "What's happening?" he asked, voice quivering. Maya knelt, locking eyes with him. "We're going to be okay," she said. "Follow my lead, trust me." And somehow in that moment the chaos seemed to pause. Oxygen hissed softly from the masks. The metal walls vibrated gently under the plane's stress, and outside the F-35s danced through the clouds, protective and unyielding. Maya felt the weight of her secret past pressing on her chest, but she didn't falter. She had faced impossible odds before. She had survived. She had saved lives. And now, 30,000 feet above the earth, she was called to do it again. She glanced at the cockpit, the captain slumped in his seat, co-pilot barely conscious. A wave of determination surged through her. If she had to, she would take control herself. She had landed military aircraft in hostile territories, extracted teams from enemy fire, and navigated situations that no one else could. The world had no idea who she really was, but the jets above did. The pilots above knew that this was Falcon in the air, and they would follow her lead. The hum of the engines grew louder, almost like a drumbeat counting down the seconds. Passengers were adjusting their masks, clutching loved ones, eyes wide with terror and trust intertwined. Maya moved among them with precision, her voice a steady thread in the storm. Each movement, each word carried weight. Each action could mean the difference between life and death. Then in the corner of her eye she saw it, a glint of something unusual outside the window. Another aircraft, or a shadow in the clouds. Her stomach dropped. The calm, methodical focus she had cultivated in years of high-stakes missions returned. She squared her shoulders. No one else could do this. She had to. As the plane shook again, as alarms screamed, as the F-35s closed in protective formation, Maya's gaze hardened. Today, the world didn't know she was a hero. But up here in the clouds, among passengers who had no idea who she was, and pilots who did, her legend had already begun to unfold. The cabin was suffused with a low hiss of escaping oxygen. Passengers clutched at their masks, wide-eyed and trembling, some praying silently, others sobbing in shock. Maya Carter moved like a force of nature, weaving between the rows with practiced precision, checking each mask, correcting slack straps, crouching to reassure children and guiding terrified adults. Her calm voice cut through the chaos, an anchor amidst the storm. "You're safe. Breathe. Follow my lead, we're going to get through this together." A toddler in 15C had cried herself into a small, stifled scream, the sound bouncing off the metal walls. Maya crouched, gently lifting the child onto her hip, humming softly to drown out the panic around them. The child's wails subsided almost immediately. "See, it's okay," Maya whispered. "You're safe. Mommy's right here." The cabin crew followed her lead, their hands shaking but disciplined. Together they worked to calm passengers, securing those who were most vulnerable and maintaining order as best they could. Sweat beaded on Maya's brow, the hum of the plane vibrating through her body, but she felt no fear, not the kind that paralyzes. Fear here had to be harnessed. It had to sharpen focus. Outside, the F-35s maintained a tight formation, cutting through the clouds like shadows. Maya caught a fleeting glimpse of one pilot's helmeted gaze through the cockpit glass. Something electric passed in that brief moment, a flash of recognition, understanding, almost reverence. "Falcon," one of them muttered under his breath, the word carried not on the radio, but through the unspoken language of experienced aviators who knew her deeds by reputation alone. She didn't have time to dwell on the recognition. Another jolt rocked the plane, throwing her slightly off balance. The overhead monitors flickered, warning lights blinking. The co-pilot's hand faltered, releasing a grip on the controls. The captain, pale and sweating, glanced toward Maya with an expression that was equal parts desperation and relief. "They're counting on you," he said, voice almost a whisper. His words struck her heavy as a stone. She nodded once, tight-lipped, aware that their fate rested entirely in her hands. Then came the unmistakable stench, smoke curling from the rear cargo hold. Maya's stomach twisted. Electrical fire. On board. An incendiary threat at 30,000 feet. Most flight attendants would call for help, but Maya was no ordinary flight attendant. Years of clandestine rescue missions, classified operations in hostile territory, extractions from enemy lines, living through impossible odds, had trained her to face fire, chaos, and panic with clarity. She grabbed the nearest fire extinguisher, a metallic hiss accompanying her sprint down the aisle toward the rear of the plane. Passengers screamed, trying to back away. Maya didn't falter. "Step back, stay calm," she shouted, her voice carrying over the alarms and cries. She trained the nozzle on the flames, short bursts controlling the spread. Smoke stung her eyes, but she ignored it, focusing entirely on the task. Slowly, the flames yielded, curling into blackened edges, finally smoldering instead of roaring. As she worked, her mind raced. The F-35s outside had shifted formation, flanking the plane with lethal precision. One of the pilots whispered into his radio, "Target integrity compromised. Falcon is active. Civilian vessel engaged." Falcon, her call sign long buried in secret government files, whispered across military channels, now visible in real time to pilots she had never met. Recognition was instantaneous. Respect followed. Fear, awe, and disbelief coalesced into one silent message. She is the Falcon. She saves when no one else can. Inside the cabin, passengers began whispering her name almost reverently. Some still cried, some still panicked, but a seed of trust had been planted. Maya could feel it, the unspoken acknowledgement that this woman, ordinary in appearance, extraordinary in skill, was their lifeline, and she wasn't about to fail them. Her focus shifted as she turned back toward the cockpit. The captain had slumped further and the co-pilot was barely conscious, muttering fragmented instructions. Maya realized the plane was beginning to veer slightly off course. If nothing else, she would have to step in. She had no choice. She approached the cockpit door, checking the latch. Locked, of course. The protocol for emergencies was strict, designed to prevent unauthorized access. But Maya had trained for everything, even scenarios that seemed impossible. She recalled the override codes embedded in her memory from years of simulations, drills, and classified exercises. Her fingers moved on instinct, entering the sequence that would unlock the door. A soft click, the cockpit was open. Inside, the chaos was palpable. Warning lights blinked frantically. Smoke from a minor electrical fault curled through the vent. The co-pilot's hands trembled on the yoke, the captain slumped, barely conscious. Maya's pulse quickened, but not from fear. Focus sharpened. She had faced impossible situations before. Hostile territory extractions, high-stakes rescues where lives hung by a thread. This was another mission, just higher and with more civilians. She knelt beside the captain, checking his pulse, and gestured to the co-pilot. "You're going to be okay, I'm taking over." His eyes met hers, wide and filled with both terror and relief. He nodded, unable to speak. Maya climbed into the co-pilot seat, fingers hovering over the controls. Autopilot could manage level flight, but maneuvering through turbulence, managing descent, and coordinating with the F-35 Escorts required human precision. Outside, she could see the stealth fighters shifting positions. scanning for threats that she couldn't yet perceive. Then she felt it, a tremor of recognition inside herself. Her past missions had trained her for this exact moment. Not only could she stabilize the plane, but she could coordinate with the pilots in the sky, execute maneuvers that no ordinary civilian could, and protect 174 lives. Her mind shifted into a rare, singular clarity. Fear became data. Panic became calculation. Chaos became opportunity. From the cockpit window, she glimpsed the F-35 lead pilot, helmet glinting in the sunlight cutting through clouds. He raised a hand slightly in acknowledgement. No words, no orders, just trust, silent but absolute. Maya's breath hitched. The irony wasn't lost on her. A civilian airliner, a woman in a flight attendant uniform, and a formation of top-tier military jets recognizing a call sign she hadn't used publicly in years. "Falcon," one of the pilots whispered into the radio, almost as if speaking her name aloud could summon courage across the miles of sky. Recognition flashed in their displays. Her missions, her impossible rescues, her legend, all encoded, remembered, now unfolding midair above a landscape of clouds and threat. Back in the cabin, Maya returned briefly, calming passengers, adjusting oxygen masks, checking vital signs. Her presence radiated authority. Her calm became a lifeline. She helped a mother with a baby, reassured a man in 14B who had been on the verge of fainting, and steadied the hands of a trembling, elderly woman. She moved like a conductor, orchestrating a symphony of survival. And yet the danger was far from over. The plane shuddered again, more violently this time. A low thrum resonated through the fuselage, a warning that mechanical failure was accelerating. Outside, the F-35s adjusted to shield the plane, signals flashing across military channels. One pilot's voice, tight with tension, muttered, "Falcon, do you copy? Civilian flight in jeopardy." Maya's jaw tightened. Her mind cataloged every variable: the failing cabin pressure, the electrical smoke, the disoriented captain, the conscious passengers, the unknown threats approaching from the horizon. Every instinct she had honed over years of impossible missions screamed at her to act decisively. She took the co-pilot's yoke with both hands, feeling the weight of the aircraft, the lives aboard, and the unspoken trust of the jets outside. The realization settled like ice. She was the only one capable of bringing this plane safely through the storm. The title of flight attendant, casual and understated, no longer applied. She was Falcon, the guardian of 174 lives at 30,000 feet, and the sky was about to test her like never before. The cabin was suffocating with smoke, the acrid smell stinging throats and eyes. The soft hiss of oxygen masks did little to mask the underlying terror. Passengers clung to one another, some praying, some trembling, and some frozen in disbelief. Maya Carter moved through the chaos like a shadow of precision, her every step calculated, every word carefully chosen. She helped a man in seat 14B buckle in and guided a young mother with a baby toward the emergency exit row. Her voice cut through the screams. "Stay calm. Follow my instructions. We can make it." The smoke in the rear of the cabin thickened. Electrical fire from the cargo hold had spread faster than she had anticipated. The smell of melting plastic and overheated circuitry filled the aisle. She grabbed the extinguisher again, moving swiftly down the narrow corridor toward the flames. Sparks leapt and hissed from the wires. Maya felt the heat lick at her uniform, but she pressed on. Training, instinct, and an almost unearthly calm guided her hands. She sprayed short, controlled bursts, containing the fire enough to prevent it from spreading further. Behind her, passengers watched in awe. Some whispered her name, "Falcon, is that her?" While others clutched loved ones with renewed hope. In that moment, Maya wasn't just a flight attendant. She was a lifeline, a force of nature, a figure of calm in a sky filled with chaos. But outside, the real danger loomed, invisible and unknown. The F-35s had adjusted their formation, scanning the clouds with deadly precision. Maya caught a glimpse of one pilot through the cockpit glass, helmet reflecting the sunlight, eyes narrowed. The lead pilot's voice crackled faintly through a secure channel. "Falcon, There's an unknown element approaching from the North Quadrant, possibly hostile. Confirm interception. Maya's pulse quickened. The shadow on the radar, the unknown aircraft, was moving faster than anything she could have anticipated. She had faced enemy combatants before, but never in a situation like this. An airliner full of civilians, trapped between mechanical failure, fire, and now, a potential airborne threat she couldn't see. She returned briefly to the cockpit door, assessing the captain and co-pilot. The captain was slumped, eyes half closed, barely responsive. The co-pilot's hands trembled over the controls, pale as the clouds outside. It was clear. Neither of them could manage the plane in this state. Maya had no choice. She would have to take control. Sliding into the co-pilot's seat, she placed her hands firmly on the yoke. Her mind flicked through every piece of knowledge she had ever learned: aircraft mechanics, flight dynamics, emergency procedures, and classified maneuvers she had executed in missions long buried in government files. This was no longer a commercial flight. This was a rescue operation at 30,000 feet, with 174 lives in her hands and no margin for error. Outside, the sky had turned into a theater of tension. The F-35s hovered in protective formation, their sleek shapes cutting through clouds, scanning for threats that the passengers could not even imagine. One of the pilots whispered, "Falcon, do you copy?" Her voice, calm and steady, carried over the secure channel. "Copy. I'm stabilizing civilian vessel. Request escort to nearest landing zone." The words hung in the air like a promise. The pilots recognized her abilities, her legendary call sign, and trusted her implicitly. That trust was both a burden and a lifeline. Inside the cabin, passengers were starting to regain some composure. Maya moved back down the aisle briefly, checking on the most vulnerable: children, the elderly, those whose panic had left them nearly catatonic. She adjusted oxygen masks, offered soft words of reassurance, and ensured that the fire was under control. Sweat streamed down her face, eyes burning from smoke, but she didn't stop. She couldn't. Every second mattered. Every breath mattered. Every decision mattered. And then she felt it. A subtle vibration, different from the turbulence of the storm or the hum of the engines. It was deliberate, calculated, dangerous. Maya's instincts screamed at her. They were not alone. The unknown aircraft outside were closing in, moving with intent, and the F-35s were preparing to intercept. She could see the radar blips dancing in formation, matching the speed and trajectory of an enemy she could not yet identify. Her hands tightened on the yoke. She knew what had to be done. With a deep breath, she began adjusting the autopilot to stabilize altitude while manually navigating through turbulence and coordinating with the escort jets. Outside, the F-35s mirrored her maneuvers, creating a protective perimeter that was both precise and lethal. Inside, the passengers had begun murmuring her name again. Some had recognized her from social media, others had heard the whispers of the flight crew, but few understood the full magnitude of what they were witnessing. Maya was not just guiding them through turbulence or fire. She was orchestrating a complex aerial ballet, dodging potential threats, stabilizing a failing aircraft, and keeping the entire cabin calm under life-threatening pressure. She caught sight of one passenger, a young man gripping his seat, tears streaking his cheeks. He mouthed the words, "Thank you," and she gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. There was no time for sentimentality, not now. Every second she spent acknowledging gratitude was a second the plane could drift off course or the fire could flare again. The unknown aircraft were still closing in, faster now. The F-35s shifted aggressively, positioning themselves between the plane and the threat. Maya's mind raced, calculating trajectories, predicting maneuvers, and maintaining a delicate balance between stability and evasive action. Every instinct, every ounce of training from classified missions, surged to the forefront. Then through the cockpit window she saw it, a shadow breaking through the clouds, sleek and menacing, moving faster than the eye could follow. The lead F-35 pilot radioed a single word, clipped and urgent: "Falcon," recognition, warning, a call to action. Maya exhaled sharply, her knuckles white against the yoke. This was no ordinary flight emergency. It was a high-stakes game of aerial chess, and the lives of 174 civilians rested entirely on her ability to think, act, and execute flawlessly. She glanced at the co-pilot, whose hands were trembling violently, and gave a firm, commanding nod. "Step back. I've got this," she said, her voice calm, unwavering, almost eerily so. The F-35s responded immediately, adjusting their formation to shield the plane while keeping the hostile aircraft in their sights. The lead pilot's voice crackled. "Falcon, you are clear to maneuver. Civilian protection is priority." Maya's mind moved faster than thought, calculating descent angles, lateral shifts, speed adjustments, and emergency procedures simultaneously. The smoke in the cabin, the passengers' fear, the mechanical alarms, all faded into the background. There was only the plane, the sky, and the mission. She made a subtle adjustment to the autopilot, stabilizing the plane while taking manual control of minor directional shifts. Outside, the F-35s blocked any potential intercept, creating a corridor of safety through the clouds. But the unknown aircraft didn't retreat. It circled, probing, testing, calculating. Maya's pulse quickened, not from fear but from anticipation. This was a challenge she had trained for her entire life. The plane shuddered under sudden turbulence, the smoke thickened again, and a cry went up from the cabin as passengers gripped their seats. Maya's voice rose above it all, calm, commanding, precise. "Stay down, keep your masks on. We are in control. Follow my lead." Her eyes met those of the lead F-35 pilot through the window. Recognition passed silently, a bridge of trust spanning thousands of feet of airspace. They knew who she was. They trusted her implicitly. And in that trust lay the only hope for survival. Maya Carter's hands rested firmly on the yoke, the hum of the engines vibrating through her body as the cabin filled with smoke and fear. Her eyes flicked between the instrument panel, the view outside the cockpit window, and the F-35s flanking the airliner like silent guardians. She was no longer merely a flight attendant. She was Falcon, a living legend in the eyes of the pilots above, entrusted with a mission that could define life or death for 174 souls. The captain's body slumped further against the seat, pale and trembling. The co-pilot's hands shook uncontrollably, sweat streaking his face. Maya knelt briefly, checking vitals and offering a firm, authoritative command. "Step back. I've got this. Follow my instructions and we'll get through this together." Her mind raced. Autopilot could hold altitude and basic trajectory, but the turbulence, mechanical anomalies, and unknown threats outside required manual intervention. She recalled every secret simulation, every classified flight maneuver she had practiced in her covert missions, the ones buried deep in the files labeled top secret. Each memory surged forward with clarity, a roadmap in a sky filled with danger. "Cabin stable?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder. The remaining flight attendants nodded, faces streaked with soot and sweat. Passengers were strapped into their seats, some clutching loved ones, others staring wide-eyed, trusting her entirely. She gave them a brief nod, a silent assurance that the impossible could still be achieved. Outside, the F-35s maintained formation, responding instantly to her adjustments. One pilot radioed, his voice clipped but tinged with urgency. "Falcon, hostile element approaching fast. Recommend evasive maneuver." Maya's eyes narrowed. She assessed the aircraft's speed, trajectory, and the plane's current condition. Every instinct screamed that time was slipping through her fingers. A split-second decision could mean survival or catastrophe. She began a controlled descent, a delicate dance between altitude, speed, and angle, coordinating seamlessly with the F-35s. Smoke wafted into the cockpit as she adjusted controls, her jaw set tight. Her hands moved in perfect synchrony, flipping switches, stabilizing the plane, and recalibrating autopilot to relieve minor fluctuations. Every flick of her wrist, every calculation was precise, honed from years of impossible missions where lives had rested solely on her skill. The passengers sensed the calm determination radiating from her. Whispers spread. "That's her, the flight attendant, she's saving us." Others stared in awe, gripping the armrests, realizing that this woman was guiding them through chaos with unwavering authority. And yet the danger was far from over. The unknown aircraft had closed in, circling the airliner, probing for weaknesses. The F-35 lead pilot muttered through secure radio channels, "Falcon, you're the only variable keeping them from engagement. We're locked on, but you must maneuver." Maya's pulse surged. She had never faced this combination of threats before: mechanical failure, fire, passenger panic, and a potential hostile intercept. But fear did not paralyze her. It sharpened her senses. Every detail, the faint tremor in the fuselage, the shifting shadows outside, the blinking alarms on the dashboard, was data to be analyzed and acted upon. She leaned forward, adjusting the throttle and flaps, guiding the plane through a sudden pocket of turbulence. The cabin shook violently, oxygen masks bouncing against the ceiling, passengers' screams filling the air. Maya's voice, steady and commanding, rose above it. "Brace! Stay calm, we are in control." For a fleeting moment, she caught a glimpse of the F-35 pilot closest to her window. Recognition burned in his eyes. A single nod, almost imperceptible, passed between them. It wasn't just acknowledgement, it was trust, an unspoken agreement that she was the only one capable of bringing this plane safely through the storm. Back in the cabin, she moved quickly, checking on the most vulnerable passengers. She adjusted masks, reassured crying children, and guided terrified adults with firm authority. Sweat stung her eyes and soot coated her uniform, but she didn't stop. She could not. Every second counted. Every action mattered. A sudden alarm blared, louder than before. Maya's heart skipped a beat. Warning lights flashed red across the instrument panel, signaling a critical electrical failure. The smoke thickened. She swallowed hard, forcing herself to remain calm. She had dealt with emergencies before: fire, turbulence, enemy pursuit, but never this concentrated a storm of danger in a single place. She took a deep breath, remembering a mantra she had used in every impossible mission: focus, act, survive. Her fingers danced over the controls, rerouting power, stabilizing critical systems, and preparing for any eventuality. She glanced outside, calculating the distance to Chicago and the safe corridor cleared by the F-35 Escorts. Every second mattered. Every decision carried unimaginable weight. Then came the most unnerving moment. A shadow streaked across the clouds, closer than she had anticipated. The hostile aircraft, she didn't yet know how many, was closing in, testing the limits of both her skills and the escort's protection. The lead pilot's voice was crisp and urgent. "Falcon, evasive maneuver now." Maya's body tensed. She executed a precise banking maneuver, adjusting pitch and yaw while stabilizing the plane's descent. The airliner shuddered, alarms blaring, but the F-35s mirrored her movements, creating a protective envelope that kept the hostile aircraft at bay. She felt the full weight of 174 lives pressing down on her shoulders, yet clarity ruled over panic. In that moment, the cabin became a stage for something extraordinary. Passengers, oblivious to the full extent of the threat outside, were guided with quiet authority by a woman they barely knew. Flight attendants moved efficiently, following every direction, inspired by her calm courage. Maya's past, years of classified missions, impossible rescues, survival against all odds, had prepared her for this moment, and now it all converged at 30,000 feet. She adjusted the yoke slightly, guiding the plane through a patch of turbulence, her eyes never leaving the horizon outside the cockpit window. The shadow of the unknown aircraft lingered at the edge of perception, testing her, probing for weaknesses. But Maya was ready. Every movement was deliberate, every decision calculated. She was Falcon, trusted, recognized, and unstoppable. A passenger in 16D whispered, eyes wide, "How is she so calm?" The man beside him, holding a child, shook his head. "I don't know, but I think she's going to save us." Maya's jaw set. Words were unnecessary. Actions were everything. She coordinated with the F-35s, relaying subtle signals, adjusting trajectory and maintaining stability while the hostile aircraft circled, testing their defenses. Every instinct, every ounce of training, every experience she had ever endured was being called upon simultaneously. Smoke continued to curl through the cabin, alarms blared, and yet the plane remained steady. Maya's hands, firm and unyielding on the controls, guided the aircraft with precision, countering turbulence, mechanical anomalies, and the unseen threat above. The F-35s formed a lethal barrier, but the responsibility for life, safety, and survival rested entirely on her. And then, for a fleeting, almost miraculous instant, a strange calm descended. The plane was stable, the fire contained, passengers were breathing more steadily, and the hostile aircraft had not yet struck. Maya allowed herself a single thought. She could do this. She could save them. But as she glanced at the instruments, a new warning blinked, a subtle but ominous signal that mechanical failure was worsening. Her pulse quickened. The emergency was far from over. Every second still mattered. Every decision was critical. The smoke had thickened to a choking haze that clung to the cabin walls and stung every throat. Oxygen masks hissed continuously, creating a metallic echo against the screams of terrified passengers. Maya Carter moved through the chaos like a figure of steel, her movements precise, her voice slicing through the panic. "Stay calm. Follow my instructions. Breathe." A mother in 22C clutched her baby to her chest, her knuckles white, trembling with fear. Maya knelt, taking the child gently in one arm while guiding the mother to a more secure position. "You're safe," she whispered, her voice steady, carrying a calmness that seemed impossible in such chaos. The baby ceased crying and the mother's sobs softened, her trust transferred entirely to Maya. A man in 14B had been staring at the ceiling, frozen with panic. Maya crouched in front of him, looking directly into his eyes. "Listen to me. You are going to be fine. Trust me." His lips trembled, then he nodded, gripping her arm tightly. In that moment, the airliner felt smaller, safer, though danger still loomed outside in the form of unseen threats and mechanical failure. Outside the cockpit window, the F-35s maintained a perfect formation, circling and sweeping the skies. The lead pilot's helmet reflected the gray clouds, his visor catching the sunlight in a sharp, metallic gleam. He spoke briefly over a secure channel. "Falcon, the unknown aircraft are closing. Possible interception imminent." Falcon, her call sign once classified, whispered across military comms in real time. Maya's pulse quickened, not with fear, but with the rare clarity that came from instinctual, trained precision. Every maneuver she had performed in covert operations, every extraction in hostile territory, every impossible survival situation, all had prepared her for this exact scenario. She was no longer just a flight attendant. She was the linchpin between life and death. In the rear cabin, passengers began to stir, whispering Maya's name in awe. Some had heard of the legendary Falcon online, stories whispered in aviation circles, tales of impossible rescues and classified missions. Others had only begun to sense her authority in the air, the calm precision that turned terror into controlled focus. Yet none of them fully understood the magnitude of her skills or the gravity of what was happening outside. Suddenly, a jolt ran through the plane, stronger than any turbulence experienced in commercial flight. Alarms screamed. Smoke from the cargo hold twisted upward into the cabin, curling in thick gray tendrils. Maya sprang into action, extinguishing the flames with quick, controlled bursts, each spray precise, calculated, and effective. She moved like a conductor in a symphony of survival, orchestrating the movements of crew and passengers alike. The unknown aircraft outside remained a threat, their presence hinted at but not fully revealed. The F-35s adjusted formation, wings slicing through clouds, engines roaring with lethal precision. The lead pilot spoke again, urgency sharp in his voice. "Falcon, they're testing our defenses. You must keep the aircraft stable." Maya's fingers tightened on the yoke. Every movement mattered. She adjusted autopilot subtly, corrected minor course deviations, and manually manipulated altitude and speed. The plane shuddered again, smoke curling toward the cockpit. A flash of light from the dashboard warned of electrical anomalies, yet she remained focused, her mind calculating every variable in real time. Inside the cabin, she moved like lightning, assisting a child who had panicked and thrown off her oxygen mask, guiding a passenger with a broken ankle toward a safer seat, checking each emergency exit. Sweat streaked her face, her uniform smeared with soot, but she did not falter. The passengers had begun whispering thanks, calling her a miracle, a savior. Their gratitude was fleeting. There was no time for celebration, but it bolstered her resolve. The F-35s outside were a constant reminder that this was no ordinary emergency. Radar blips indicated multiple unknown aircraft maneuvering with calculated intent, their speed and trajectory far beyond what a commercial plane could evade without assistance. The lead pilot's voice crackled over the secure line. "Falcon, evasive maneuvers may be required. Civilian lives are priority." Her mind moved faster than thought. She calculated descent angles, monitored cabin pressure, assessed fire containment, coordinated with crew, and synchronized with the escort jets. Every instinct, honed in years of covert missions, came alive. This was no longer a flight. It was a battlefield, and she was the general. Then she noticed it, a subtle shift in the clouds, the faint glint of a wing moving too quickly, too deliberately. The unknown aircraft had closed the gap. The F-35s flanked aggressively, maintaining a protective barrier, but the hostile craft was testing the limits of their defenses. Maya's stomach clenched. This was the true test, the moment where training, instinct, and courage collided. She exhaled sharply, keeping her voice steady as she moved back to the cockpit controls. Autopilot was holding, but she needed manual intervention to navigate through the turbulence and maintain a protective corridor. Her hands danced over the yoke, small adjustments, subtle movements, each one calculated to counter wind shear, cabin shift, and external pressure. In the aisle behind her, passengers had begun to whisper her name, realizing that the woman in the flight attendant uniform was the difference between survival and disaster. One elderly man, gripping his oxygen mask tightly, muttered, She's extraordinary." A child echoed softly, "Falcon, she's saving us." Maya's jaw tightened. Words were secondary. Action was everything. She coordinated with the F-35s using subtle radio signals, adjusting the plane's pitch and speed in sync with the Escorts' maneuvers. The unknown aircraft hesitated at the edge of radar detection, testing the limits of the formation, circling like a predator but unable to break through. The smoke in the cabin thickened again, alarms blared, and passengers gripped armrests, hearts hammering in unison. Maya moved between them swiftly, checking vital signs, adjusting masks, and offering quiet, firm reassurance. She lifted a toddler, soothing it with gentle hums, guiding panicked passengers with calm authority. Every gesture, every word, every decision carried weight beyond measure. And then the lead F-35 pilot spoke, voice low but carrying the weight of recognition. "Falcon, you're handling this flawlessly. Civilian protection intact. Enemy is retreating for now." Her lips curved into a brief, almost imperceptible smile. Recognition from the sky, yes, but the work was far from over. She had stabilized the plane, controlled the fire, calmed the passengers, and managed the threat for now. The unknown aircraft had retreated temporarily, but she knew better than to let her guard down. At 30,000 feet, danger could return in a heartbeat. She glanced around the cabin. Eyes followed her every movement, trust and awe reflected in every gaze. The passengers had begun to breathe more evenly, some holding onto loved ones, some gripping seats with quiet determination. The crew, inspired by her poise and skill, moved with renewed confidence. For them, she was no longer just a flight attendant, she was the silent hero, the Falcon, guiding them through a storm they could barely comprehend. Maya returned to the cockpit, adjusting throttle and flaps, her hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. Outside, the F-35s mirrored every maneuver, creating a corridor of safety as the plane descended toward the controlled airspace leading to Chicago. Smoke still curled through the cabin. Alarms continued their urgent signals, but she remained in control. Her mind flicked through contingency plans. Emergency landing procedures, evacuation protocols, coordination with ground control, all rehearsed endlessly in simulations. But this was real, and the stakes were higher than any drill. She had to balance stability, speed, descent trajectory, passenger safety, and external threat, all simultaneously. And yet, even in this chaos, there was clarity. Every movement, every decision, every breath was purposeful. She had faced impossible situations before, missions where failure meant death for dozens, sometimes hundreds. This was no different, only the theater had changed. The lives of 174 civilians, unknown to her personally, rested entirely on her shoulders. Maya Carter's hands were steady on the yoke, her eyes locked on the instrument panel as the plane began its controlled descent toward Chicago. The hum of the engines vibrated through her body, a reminder that every system, every decision, carried the weight of 174 lives. Smoke lingered in the cabin, curling like a living thing, and passengers held tight to their masks and loved ones, their terror tempered by the calm authority radiating from her. The F-35s maintained their protective formation, slicing through the clouds with lethal precision. Maya could see them through the cockpit windows, their sleek shapes moving with uncanny synchronicity, mirroring her maneuvers as if they were extensions of her own instincts. Their presence was both reassurance and a stark reminder. Danger was still near, even if unseen. A sudden jolt rattled the fuselage, stronger than anything experienced before. Alarms screamed, lights flashed, and the plane groaned under stress. Maya exhaled sharply, steadying her hands. Turbulence, mechanical instability, and the unpredictable movements of the hostile aircraft outside all combined into a perfect storm. She had to act fast. "Cabin stable?" she asked, her voice calm yet commanding. The flight attendants nodded, rushing to reassure passengers, check oxygen levels, and secure anyone who had unbuckled. Maya's gaze swept the cabin, her mind calculating every potential hazard, every variable with lightning speed. Her pulse surged, not from fear but from a rare, precise clarity. Years of classified missions, covert rescues, and impossible extractions had trained her for this exact scenario. The stakes had never been higher, and the margin for error had never been thinner. At this altitude, in this state of emergency, one wrong move could cost lives. Outside, the radar blips of the unknown aircraft danced like shadows at the edge of perception. The F-35s flanked aggressively, keeping the airliner safe while providing guidance and subtle protection. One pilot's voice crackled through a secure channel. "Falcon, unknown element is persistent. Be advised, evasive may be required." Maya's fingers tightened around the yoke. She assessed the plane's altitude, speed, and stability. Minor adjustments, perfectly timed, countered turbulence and the irregular movements caused by mechanical anomalies. The plane groaned under stress, but she remained calm, acting with precision born of experience few could imagine. In the cabin, panic had given way to cautious trust. Passengers whispered her name, eyes wide, silently aware that the woman in a flight attendant uniform was their lifeline. A young mother clutched her child, murmuring, "She's saving us. She really is." Maya offered a brief nod as she moved back to the cockpit, her attention never leaving the instruments. Smoke thickened near the rear of the plane. Electrical faults in the cargo hold threatened to reignite. Maya grabbed another extinguisher, moving swiftly to contain the fire, short, controlled bursts cutting through the flames. Sparks hissed as plastic and wiring burned, but she maintained control, her mind calculating risks and outcomes in real time. The co-pilot, pale and shaking, looked to her for guidance. Maya's voice was steady. "Step back, you're safe. Let me handle this." The man nodded, swallowing hard. He had no idea who she really was, but instinctively he trusted her. Above them, the F-35 lead pilot adjusted formation, tilting wings, banking slightly, signaling her with subtle maneuvers. Maya understood instantly. They had trained, observed, and recognized her legendary call sign. She was Falcon. The pilots trusted her instinctively, as if they could see the years of impossible missions, extractions, and rescues encoded in her every movement. A sudden burst of turbulence threw the plane sideways, rattling passengers violently. Maya's hands moved instinctively, correcting tilt and angle. The plane shuddered again, alarms blaring, but she remained in control. She had stabilized aircraft in hostile environments before. This was no different, only the stakes were higher, the audience more vulnerable. A whisper from the F-35 lead pilot cut through the secure channel. Falcon altitude dropping faster than expected. Civilian airliner must maintain integrity. Recommend immediate corrective. Maya nodded, understanding instantly. She adjusted throttle and flaps, correcting descent trajectory, stabilizing the plane's pitch. Her movements were fluid, precise, almost rhythmic, as if she were conducting a deadly symphony of air, metal, and human lives. Inside, passengers clutched their armrests, some crying softly, some silent in awe. A young man whispered, "I can't believe she's doing this alone." Another muttered, "She's a hero, a real hero." Maya allowed herself no time for satisfaction. Each breath, each movement, each calculation mattered. Smoke continued to curl from the rear, alarms blared relentlessly, and outside, the shadow of potential threats lingered. Maya assessed, recalculated, and acted. The F-35s responded, maintaining a protective corridor while scanning the clouds for unseen adversaries. Then came a new variable. The electrical systems were failing faster than anticipated. Warning lights blinked red across the cockpit, signaling power failures, minor but critical malfunctions. Maya's jaw tightened. The plane could still fly, but only if she managed every variable perfectly. One mistake, one missed calculation, and the descent could turn catastrophic. She glanced at the co-pilot, whose hands trembled violently. "Stay calm," she said quietly. "We're handling this. Follow my instructions." The man nodded, swallowing hard, trusting her implicitly. Outside, the F-35 lead pilot's visor reflected sunlight cutting through gray clouds. Recognition, respect, and trust were written in every movement. Falcon was at work, and they knew it. Maya adjusted the yoke, guiding the plane through an intricate descent, coordinating subtly with the F-35s to maintain a protective envelope. The unknown aircraft had not returned yet, but she remained hyperalert. Their presence was a ghost, a threat that could strike at any moment. Inside the cabin, she moved briefly, checking on passengers, adjusting oxygen masks, and soothing panicked hearts. Her authority radiated, calming the chaos. Even the most terrified passengers had begun to trust her implicitly. She had become their anchor in a sky filled with uncertainty. A sudden shudder ran through the plane. Smoke hissed from vents near the cockpit. Alarms screamed louder. Maya's pulse surged, but her hands remained steady. She had faced worse, missions that seemed impossible, operations where survival depended solely on her skill. This was no different, only the stakes were higher. She glanced outside, calculating distance to the controlled airspace, the protective corridor maintained by the F-35s. Every maneuver, every adjustment, every calculation mattered. The descent had to be precise, measured, flawless. Failure was not an option. The lead F-35 pilot's voice came through again, clipped, urgent. "Falcon, hostiles may attempt interception near landing corridor. Maintain control. Civilian lives are priority." Maya exhaled slowly. Recognition, yes, but trust even more. They had seen her work, recognized her skill, and now relied on her completely. Every ounce of training, every instinct honed in classified missions, converged in this moment. She adjusted the yoke subtly, banking the plane slightly to counter wind shear, recalibrating descent trajectory, stabilizing systems even as electrical failures threatened to overwhelm. Smoke continued to rise from the rear, alarms screamed, but she remained in control. In the cabin, whispers of her heroism spread. Some whispered her name. Others held loved ones tighter, sensing without understanding that their survival depended entirely on the woman at the controls. Maya's jaw set. Words were unnecessary. Actions were everything. She was Falcon, she was in command, and she would get them down safely or die trying. The city lights of Chicago glimmered far below, distant pinpricks in the gray haze of a turbulent sky. Maya Carter's eyes never left the cockpit instruments, her hands firm on the yoke, muscles coiled like springs ready to release. Every inch of altitude, every degree of pitch, every flick of the throttle mattered. The plane shuddered violently as another tremor of turbulence ran through the fuselage, shaking passengers in their seats. Inside, the cabin was tense but strangely quiet. Smoke had dissipated slightly, thanks to her quick interventions, but the acrid smell still clung to the air. Oxygen masks remained on, and the passengers clutched each other with white-knuckled determination. The whispers of her heroism had grown louder. "Falcon, she's going to save us." Maya exhaled sharply, forcing her mind to focus on the task at hand. Electrical systems were unstable, mechanical failures unpredictable, and turbulence relentless. But she had trained for impossible scenarios. She had faced situations where every second counted, where one wrong move meant the end. And now, at 30,000 feet, with 174 lives hanging in the balance, she was executing the most critical maneuver of her life. The F-35s flanked the plane like silent guardians. Outside the cockpit, their sleek forms cut through clouds, scanning the skies for any sign of the hostile aircraft that had threatened them earlier. The lead pilot's voice crackled over the secure channel. "Falcon, final approach corridor clear, but hostiles may still attempt engagement. Maintain control and prepare for evasive if needed." Maya nodded slightly, her pulse steady. She adjusted throttle and flaps, managing descent rate, stabilizing the pitch, and coordinating with the autopilot to smooth the approach. The plane groaned under stress, every vibration a warning of the mechanical failures that could erupt at any moment. She ignored the fear gnawing at the edge of her consciousness. Panic was a luxury she could not afford. Inside the cabin, passengers whispered her name with awe and fear. A father in 16B clutched his daughter tightly, tears streaking his face. A young mother murmured, she's saving us. I don't know how, but she's saving us." Maya moved swiftly down the aisle, checking oxygen masks, guiding passengers to remain seated and giving concise, firm instructions. "Brace for descent. Stay calm. Follow my lead." The co-pilot, pale and shaking, glanced at her with wide eyes. I don't know how you're doing this," he admitted. Maya gave a brief nod, focusing on the yoke. "Stay with me," she said. "We'll get through this." Outside, the radar blips of potential threats lingered on the edge of detection. The unknown aircraft had not returned, but their presence could not be dismissed. The F-35s adjusted formation, tilting wings, banking, and keeping the corridor clear. Every maneuver was synchronized, precise, a silent conversation of trust and recognition between Falcon and the pilots. Maya's hands moved in perfect rhythm over the controls. She adjusted the descent, calculating every angle to compensate for wind shear, turbulence, and the plane's unstable systems. Alarms blared intermittently, warning of overheating and minor electrical failures. Smoke still rose faintly from vents near the rear, and yet the plane held steady. The city below grew brighter, skyscrapers and streets illuminated against the night sky. Emergency crews awaited at the designated runway, unaware of the full scope of what was unfolding 30,000 feet above. Maya could see the runway lights piercing the dark like guiding stars. Relief was near, but danger had not fully passed. Suddenly, a jolt rocked the plane violently. Warning lights flared. Mechanical systems groaned under strain. Maya's jaw tightened. The unknown aircraft, still a potential threat, could return at any moment. She adjusted throttle and flaps to stabilize the plane, coordinating subtle movements with the F-35s outside. Their mirrored formation provided both protection and silent reassurance. Inside the cabin, passengers held their breath. Some had closed their eyes, some were whispering prayers, and others clutched loved ones. All eyes were on Falcon, even if they didn't know her name. She was the lifeline, the force guiding them safely through a storm that could have claimed them all. Maya took a deep breath, steadying her mind. Every detail mattered: descent speed, angle of approach, flap position, rudder adjustments, and coordination with the escorting jets. She had executed impossible maneuvers in hostile territories, flown through enemy fire, and rescued people under unimaginable circumstances. But nothing compared to the precision required to land this plane safely with civilians on board. "Falcon, you are clear for final approach," the lead F-35 pilot said, voice steady but urgent. "We've got visual on the runway. Enemy elements are not engaging. Civilian protection remains priority." Her pulse surged with adrenaline and focus. She adjusted the yoke, guiding the plane to align perfectly with the runway. The engines responded, the descent rate adjusted, and the flaps extended fully. The city lights reflected off the fuselage, and for a fleeting moment the world felt suspended between chaos and salvation. In the cabin, passengers braced for landing. Maya's voice rose above the alarms and murmurs. "Stay seated, brace positions, hold tight, we are almost there." The plane shook violently again as turbulence whipped through the descent corridor. Maya's hands moved with surgical precision, countering the forces, keeping the aircraft level, and communicating subtly with the F-35s to maintain protective positioning. Every movement mattered. Every decision carried immeasurable weight. Smoke swirled faintly, alarms continued, and the passengers' eyes were wide with fear and awe. They whispered her name again, some mouthing it silently, others softly crying, but all aware that their survival rested on her. The co-pilot glanced at her, voice trembling. I don't know how you're doing this." Maya's eyes met his, firm, unwavering. "Focus, trust me, we're almost there." She adjusted throttle one final time, coordinating with the autopilot for a smoother descent while maintaining manual control over critical adjustments. The runway lights grew larger, brighter, closer. Emergency crews were visible now, their vehicles lined perfectly, ready for the aircraft's arrival. Suddenly, a gust of wind rocked the plane violently. Warning lights flared again. Mechanical stress groaned through the fuselage. Maya's knuckles whitened on the yoke. The unknown threat had not fully disappeared, but the F-35s mirrored her movements perfectly, shielding the plane while signaling readiness to intercept if needed. "Falcon, you are clear. Runway in sight. Civilian lives are safe. Maintain approach," the lead pilot's voice said, calm but commanding. Maya exhaled sharply. The runway stretched before her like a lifeline. She adjusted the descent rate, kept the nose steady, flaps extended, and wheels locked. Every calculation, every maneuver, every ounce of training led to this singular moment. The plane touched down with a controlled, precise jolt. Tires screeched against asphalt. Alarms finally ceased. Smoke dissipated. Oxygen levels stabilized. The passengers, tense for what felt like an eternity, erupted into relieved applause and tears. They had survived. Maya remained calm, guiding the plane to a complete stop at the designated runway, securing the aircraft and ensuring every precaution was taken before opening the cabin doors. Her face was streaked with sweat and soot, uniform dirty from smoke, yet her posture was unwavering. Falcon, unbroken, victorious. The F-35s rose slightly, banking in a ceremonial salute as the plane came to rest. Their recognition, silent yet unmistakable, spoke volumes. She had done the impossible. A civilian airliner at 30,000 feet had survived fire, mechanical failure, turbulence, and potential aerial threats, guided entirely by a legendary flight attendant whose call sign was now known across military channels. The cabin doors hissed open, releasing the stale, smoky air that had filled the fuselage for the past tense hours. Emergency crews swarmed the plane, flashlights piercing the darkness, voices calling out instructions, and stretchers and oxygen tanks rushing into action. Passengers stepped onto the tarmac, many still clutching loved ones, all wide-eyed with disbelief. They had survived, all 174 of them, and at the center of it, covered in soot and sweat, stood Maya Carter. Her hands still shook slightly from the adrenaline, but her posture remained commanding, unyielding. Flight attendants helped passengers disembark, moving efficiently under her guidance. Cameras flashed from media crews who had been cleared to cover the emergency landing, catching glimpses of the woman who had performed what seemed impossible. But for most of the passengers, Maya's presence was far more personal than any media coverage. She was the lifeline that had pulled them through the storm. A young boy, no more than 8, ran forward and hugged her tightly, tears streaking his face. "Thank you, Falcon," he cried. His mother wrapped her arms around both of them, whispering the same words. Maya's lips curved faintly, almost imperceptibly, but she didn't speak. Words could wait. Every face around her carried the weight of survival and the unspoken gratitude she had earned in that skybound battle. Outside, the F-35s had circled briefly, then ascended into the clouds, their presence now a ghostly reminder of the invisible guardians who had protected the plane. Ground crews stared upward, all written across their faces. They had watched the escort jets maintain precision formation during the plane's descent, ensuring no harm came to the civilians below. And at the heart of that choreography was a civilian woman, recognized by the pilots as Falcon, legendary in ways the public could not yet comprehend. A flood of reporters rushed forward, shouting questions. "Who are you? How did you do it? Were you trained for this?" Maya's calm eyes swept across the crowd, assessing, calculating, weighing the importance of every word. She had spent years in missions that were classified, her skills known only to a handful of trusted personnel. Now she faced a world that wanted answers, yet the truth was more complex than any headline could capture. One reporter finally asked the question the passengers had been whispering. "Your call sign, Falcon. Why did it feel like the military pilots knew you personally?" Maya's jaw tightened slightly, but she gave a measured answer, careful not to reveal too much. "Experience teaches you to stay calm under pressure," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. "The pilots recognize the need to protect civilians. That's all." Paramedics led passengers toward ambulances for precautionary checks, while firefighters continued inspecting the plane for residual hazards. Maya moved along, helping where she could, adjusting oxygen masks, guiding panicked passengers with the same authority that had saved them in the air. Her presence alone inspired confidence, proof that courage was contagious. Meanwhile, social media erupted. Footage from onboard cameras, passengers' phones, and the airport's emergency systems began circulating rapidly. Comments poured in. "Who is Falcon? She saved 174 lives. Flight attendant or superhero?" Maya's story spread across the globe, each share amplifying the legend she had quietly lived in classified shadows for years. The co-pilot, pale and still shaken, approached her quietly. I don't even know what to say," he admitted. You saved all of us." Maya nodded, offering a faint, reassuring smile. "You did your part. We all did our part. That's what mattered." Her humility was as remarkable as her courage. She had taken command, yes, but the teamwork, trust, and coordination had saved lives collectively. As the last passenger disembarked, the crowd parted just enough for airport security to guide Maya toward a waiting vehicle. The flashing lights, the shouting reporters, the awestruck passengers, it all felt distant, surreal. She was exhausted beyond belief, yet her mind remained sharp. She had survived the impossible at 30,000 feet. She had saved lives in a way few could imagine. And now the world would know, or at least some of it. A uniformed officer approached, holding a folded document. Maya's eyes scanned it, recognizing the insignia. It was an official commendation, a public acknowledgement of actions that had been legendary yet classified. Her hands brushed over the paper lightly, a physical connection to a recognition she had never sought. She had been Falcon for years, in shadows and whispers, but today the world would glimpse the truth. The officer nodded respectfully. "Your actions were extraordinary. The nation owes you a debt it can't yet measure." Maya inhaled slowly, weighing her words carefully. "I didn't act for recognition," she said quietly. "I acted because it had to be done. Everyone aboard that plane mattered. That's all that matters." The F-35 lead pilot landed briefly nearby, his helmet off, revealing eyes that reflected respect, relief, and acknowledgement. He approached and offered a salute, one she returned instinctively. No words were exchanged. The gesture itself conveyed the bond forged in skis fraught with danger. "Falcon," he said simply, and in that single word lay decades of trust, recognition, and shared experience that no public ceremony could fully honor. As paramedics finalized checks on passengers, Maya moved toward the tarmac edge, scanning the crowd of survivors. Each face told a story, fear transformed into relief, terror into awe, despair into gratitude. She had been the bridge between life and death, guiding civilians through smoke, fire, turbulence, and the unseen threat of hostile skis. And now they lived. The media clamored for interviews, but she declined. She would not exploit the moment, would not make the story about fame. Her focus remained on the people she had saved, the crew who had trusted her, the pilots who had guided her, and the passengers who had placed their lives in her hands. News outlets quickly dubbed her Falcon, the flight attendant who defied death. Yet even as the headlines spread, she remained grounded, literal and figurative. Recognition was fleeting, the weight of what she had done, the lives she had saved, was enduring. The passengers whispered thanks, the trembling embraces, the relieved smiles. These were the true accolades. As night deepened over Chicago, Maya finally allowed herself a moment to breathe. She looked skyward, imagining the F-35s rising above the clouds, guardians returning to their secret missions, leaving her to step into the public eye while still carrying the quiet burden of a hero. Every life saved, every action precise, every second mattered, and she had delivered. A young girl approached, clutching a small, handmade card. "Thank you, Falcon," she said softly, handing it to Maya. "You saved my family." Maya knelt briefly, taking the card, smiling gently. The words were simple yet powerful validation that her courage had tangible impact. In that moment, all the danger, all the fear, all the chaos melted into a quiet, profound satisfaction. Later, as authorities filed reports, passengers debriefed, and emergency crews finalized their work, Maya stood alone for a brief moment on the tarmac. The city lights glimmered, reflecting in her eyes. The world had seen a glimpse of her legend, yet she remained the same, calm, composed, unassuming. She was Falcon, civilian, flight attendant, hero, savior. But above all, she was the one who had acted when the world needed her most. A final message crackled through the radio from the F-35 lead pilot, now airborne again. "Falcon, you've earned more than recognition today. You've earned history." Maya allowed herself a small, almost imperceptible smile. She didn't need accolades. She didn't need fame. She had saved 174 lives, and that was enough. For now, Falcon would rest, but the legend, her legend, would endure.